She didn't scream. She didn't argue. But the moment her boss said, "You're done here," something unshakable rose inside her, not because she broke a rule, but because she stood up for a man and his dog, a man who had once put his life on the line for the country. What she didn't know was that someone hit record, and by the time the morning coffee rush ended, the ground beneath her quiet cafe had already started to tremble. What happened next would shake an entire town and echo far beyond. Grace Donnelly was not someone people noticed right away, but once they did, they never forgot her at 35. She managed the Mason Mug Cafe, tucked just outside downtown Mason, Georgia. It was only 15 minutes from Fort Granger, one of the largest Marine bases in the area. The town felt like a painting from a simpler time. Trees lined the sidewalks, flags hung from porches, and the hardware store still looked the same as it had decades ago. But inside the cafe, something felt warmer, more human. Grace made sure of that. She didn't run her cafe like a business. She ran it like a second home. People came in tired or hurting and somehow left a little lighter. The coffee wasn't fancy, no espresso art or modern trends, just strong, hot refills and kindness that showed up in small ways, like notes pinned to the bulletin board. But the real difference wasn't the coffee. It was Grace. She remembered names. She remembered who liked the sugars, who hadn't slept in weeks, who couldn't face a full room. She remembered birthdays and deployment dates. And most importantly, she made room for silence, especially the kind carried by veterans who had seen too much. Every Wednesday at 9 a.m., she hosted what the town came to know as Heroes Are. It started small, just her father-in-law, Ben, a tough retired Marine, then Ralph, a quiet Vietnam vet, and Louisa, a nurse who had once worked in combat hospitals and still laughed like wind chimes. Over time, the table grew. Veterans from Desert Storm, Iraq, Afghanistan, they all found their way to her cafe, not for the food, but for the space Grace created. Before every Hero's Hour, she always said the same thing: this is a place to be seen, not fixed, to sit, not perform. And they believed her. Some shared jokes, some shared scars, some didn't speak at all, and that was okay. Grace never spoke much about her own loss, but everyone in town knew. Her husband, Staff Sergeant Michael Donnelly, had been killed in action 6 years earlier in Helmand Province, Afghanistan. A photo of him hung near the register, not in uniform, but in a flannel shirt, holding a coffee mug, smiling outside the cafe. It had been taken to weeks before his last deployment. He never made it back. Grace never remarried. She never even hinted at it. Instead, she poured her grief into the Mason mug, not to forget, but to build something with it. Something that mattered. People didn't just like her, they respected her. Veterans called her ma'am, without joking. Teenagers held the door open for her without being told. Even the mayor stopped by once a month to say thanks for what she gave the community. But Grace never did it for attention. She did it for the mission, the kind that doesn't come with medals. Every time she gave a vet a quiet place to sit, every time she noticed someone staring too long at nothing and went to check, every time she let a service dog curl up under the table without asking, it wasn't a rule she followed. It was instinct. It was love. That's why, on that one crisp Wednesday morning, the day everything changed, she was already behind the counter like always. Her sleeves were rolled, hair tied back, calm and focused. The regulars had started to arrive. Coffee brewed. Laughter filled the air. And then the door opened. Ray McMillan stepped inside with his dog, Shadow. Ray was new to town, late 50s, ex-Marine, quiet, reserved. But he showed up, and that meant something. Shadow, a black lab and shepherd mix, never left Ray's side. The dog wore a bright red vest that said, "Service dog, do not pet." Grace gave Ray a small smile. Table by the windows open, she said. Ray nodded and headed over. Shadow closed behind. Then the air shifted. The door flew open again, and it walked a man who didn't seem to know how to smile. Navy blazer, pressed pants, clipboard in hand like it was a sword. His name tag said, Logan Prescott, State Health Inspector. Grace hadn't been expecting a visit. "Can I help you find something?" she asked politely. "Inspection," he said, voice flat, without waiting. He started moving through the cafe. He tapped counters, opened fridges, checked labels. And then he saw the dog. He froze. "That animal," he said loudly, pointing at Shadow, "violates state health code." No animals where food is served. People stopped talking. Heads turned. Grace stepped out from behind the counter. Calm. Careful. He's a registered service dog, she said. Law allows him to be here. Prescott narrowed his eyes. I don't care what vest he's wearing. That dog is a health risk. Dander, saliva, hair. Unless you want this place shut down, that dog leaves. Ray didn't move. Shadow stayed close. Still and alert. The cafe fell into silence. Grace took a breath. I won't ask a veteran to leave, and I won't ask a service dog to leave either. Prescott clenched his jaw. You're welcome to write your report, Grace added, but you'll be writing it knowing you just tried to shame a man who served this country in front of the people he protected. A voice from the back of the cafe whispered, damn right, but it was already too late. Someone else had just walked in. Deborah Lyle, regional manager of the Mason Muggs parent company. She had arrived early for her routine check-in, just in time to witness the entire confrontation. Her tone was sharp, her words colder than the air outside. Grace Donnelly, she said loudly, you just violated a direct health policy in front of a state inspector. Pack your things. You're terminated. Gasps filled the cafe. Someone dropped a spoon. Ray was halfway out of his seat. Stunned, Grace stood still. Then slowly, she looked around the room. At Ray, at Shadow, at the chalkboard near the door that read, Heroes are today. Free coffee for vets. And then she smiled. Not a big smile. Just enough. She untied her apron with steady hands, folded it, placed it on the counter. She leaned into the young barista near the espresso machine. Make sure Ray gets his refill, she whispered. Then, she walked out the side door into the cool morning light. No one followed. But someone in the cafe had already pressed record. And just like that, a quiet act of courage was caught on camera. Grace didn't just walk out of a cafe that day. She walked into something bigger, because out there, through texts, social media, and whispered shares, her story had begun to spread. Meanwhile, somewhere in a quiet office filled with military photos and medals, Colonel Richard Gaines picked up his phone. He did not ignore the call. Back at the cafe, silence had settled in. 35 minutes passed. Some customers left their drinks half full. Others just stared at their tables. The young barista, Lena, stayed at her post. Her hands shook as she poured Ray's second cup of coffee. I didn't know what to say. She later told someone, but if I walked away, I'd feel like I let her down. Ray didn't touch his coffee. Shadow lay at his feet, ears twitching, but still, it was as if the room had lost something it didn't know how to get back. And then, the ground rumbled. At first, it sounded like faraway thunder. The chairs shook, the coffee and cups rippled, the windows buzzed faintly. Customers stood and turned toward the front. Down the misty road came from military Humvees, tires roaring against the street, their headlights like searchlights cutting through the morning fog. The vehicles rolled into the parking lot slowly, one behind the other, blocking the front of the cafe. Their doors opened together. Out stepped Colonel Richard Gaines. He wore full Marine Corps dress blues, every metal polished, gloves in hand, his face calm and unreadable. Behind him came a dozen Marines, lined up in perfect formation. They stood at attention on the sidewalk, silent, UNMOVING. Inside, the room stood frozen. Logan Prescott, the inspector, lowered his clipboard. Forgotten. Deborah Lyle stepped back like the floor had burned her feet. The cafe bell jingled once. Colonel Gaines entered, alone. His boots echoed with each step, loud in the quiet. He walked to the center of the cafe. He looked once at Lena, who stood frozen. Then he looked at Ray. Ray rose slowly. Their eyes met. Ray nodded. And the colonel gave him a quiet salute. Then Prescott found his voice. I didn't know. Colonel Gaines didn't raise his voice. You don't have to know who someone is to treat them with basic dignity. He turned to Lena. Is Grace Donnelly here? Lena shook her head. She was fired for standing up for Mr. McMillan and Shadow. The colonel's jaw tightened. That woman has served the families of this base better than most of our programs combined, he said. She gave my men a place to breathe when they had no words, and she treated a Marine with the respect this country promised him, but forgot to deliver. Ray finally spoke. His voice was rough but steady. She didn't ask questions, he said. She didn't flinch when I walked in with my dog. She just poured the coffee and let me sit. It was the first time in years I felt like a person again. A woman near the register wiped a tear from her cheek. Colonel Gaines nodded. He turned and walked toward the door. Then he raised his hand. Outside, the Marines moved in. 2 of them stepped behind the counter. They took down the corporate logo from the wall and folded it carefully like a flag dot. Another Marine placed a new chalkboard on the wall. It read, "Welcome to Grace's house, where honor is served daily." Deborah Lyle opened her mouth to speak. Colonel Gaines gave her one look. "You've made your decision," he said. "Now we'll make ours." Then he stepped outside, phone in hand. Lena's phone buzzed a moment later. She looked down and blinked. "It's a message from Fort Granger," she said. "They want Grace to report to base headquarters today." Ray sat back, stunned. Shadow stood up beside him. And inside that little cafe, something more powerful than coffee had started to brew. Grace sat in her truck at the edge of her driveway, keys in hand, engine off. She hadn't changed out of her cafe clothes, jeans stained with coffee, a warm blue flannel, and shoes that had survived years of spilled espresso. She had been sitting there for 15 minutes. Her phone buzzed again. The message was still there. From Fort Granger, Colonel Richard Gaines wanted to meet her at base headquarters today. She didn't know what it meant. She didn't know if it was good or bad. But something inside her had shifted. Something bigger than coffee and chalkboards had just started. Grace finally turned the key. The road to the base was familiar. She'd driven it hundreds of times before, dropping off muffins, delivering thermoses for soldiers on night shift. But today felt different. When she passed through the gates, the guards nodded. One of them even said, "Thank you, ma'am." She parked and walked into the administration building. Clean halls, flags, quiet footsteps. Colonel Gaines was already waiting. He wasn't wearing full dress this time, just a khaki uniform. Calm, respectful. "Grace," he said, offering his hand. "Thank you for coming." She shook it firmly, though her hand trembled slightly. "I still don't really know why I'm here." He smiled just a little. "Let me show you." They walked down a hallway lined with old photos and maps, training guides, unit flags. He stopped at a door labeled Veteran Transition and Wellness Initiative. Inside was a large, empty room, folding chairs, whiteboards, stacks of boxes. A few young staffers moved quietly in the back, unpacking therapy mats and sorting donations. "This is a pilot program," Colonel Gaines explained. "We've been trying to launch it for 2 years." He looked at her seriously. "But it's hard to find someone who really understands veterans, not just from textbooks, but from the heart." Grace folded her arms. "I'm not a therapist. I don't have a degree." "No," he said, "but you created a place where broken men and women felt human again. You did more with coffee and care than some centers do with big budgets." She didn't respond. Then a voice from the back of the room called out, "Is that her?" A young woman stepped forward, mid-20s, birth scars along her jaw and arms. Her sleeves covered most of it. Her name tag said Tiffany Rios. She had a golden retriever puppy by her side, wearing a small red vest that read, "In training." "Hi," she said shyly. "I saw the video of you with the dog and that man. I haven't been able to sit in a cafe since I came home, but I think I could sit in one if you were running it." Grace blinked. Her chest felt tight, but in a good way. Colonel Gaines smiled. "Again, we'd like to offer you a position, not a figurehead, not a name on a brochure. We want you to direct this center." Grace stared at him. "You're serious?" "As serious as a heart attack," he said. "You build the programs, shape the space. You already know what matters: community, routine, respect." Grace looked at Tiffany, now kneeling beside her puppy. She thought of Ray, of Shadow, of all the quiet souls who had walked into the Mason mug just needing to breathe. And suddenly, the answer was clear. "I'll do it," she whispered. Colonel Gaines nodded. "Then let's get to work." That night, Grace stood alone inside what would soon become the heart of Fort Granger's wellness efforts. The walls were bare, the floors were still dusty, but the space already felt sacred. She reached into her bag and pulled out an old photo. It was Michael, her husband, sitting outside the cafe, coffee mug in hand, boots kicked up, smiling. She pinned it to the wall. No frame, no plaque. Just love. Just memory. Word about Grace's new role spread fast. By the end of the week, the center wasn't just another government program. It had become something real. Veterans who hadn't stepped onto the base in years began to show up. Young soldiers brought their spouses. The local paper, the Mason Herald, ran a front-page headline, "From Cafe to Command: How Grace Donnelly is Rebuilding Trust One Cup at a Time." But Grace didn't change her ways. She didn't hire expensive consultants or make long speeches. She just listened. She remembered names. She kept a whiteboard near the coffee pot that said, "Who needs a ride? Who needs a listener?" She let dogs curl up in corners. She wrote in her old notebook, the same one she used at the cafe. New pages, new names, new needs. Some days were hard. Some were quiet. Some were just coffee and silence. But healing doesn't always need noise. Ray came often now. Shadow would head straight to the same spot every time, like he belonged. Tiffany showed up every Tuesday. She wasn't ready to speak yet, but she had started drawing again, sketches of dogs, hands, HOMECOMINGS. Lena, the young barista, visited every Friday. She brought coffee. She brought laughter. She helped Grace with everything from choosing paint colors to writing a mission statement. Not everyone supported the center. Some officials questioned why someone without formal training was running a federal program. Auditors arrived with clipboards and questions. They checked logs, asked about certifications, even tested the coffee machine's water filters. One man looked Grace in the eye. "What qualifies you to counsel veterans?" he asked. Grace didn't blink. "I don't have certificates," she said softly, "just consistency and kindness." A week later, she got a letter. The wellness center was being reviewed for national expansion. Colonel Gaines called it a victory. Grace just called it humbling. One quiet afternoon, Grace returned to the Mason Mug Cafe. She didn't tell anyone she was coming. She just walked in. Lena was behind the counter, filling cups like always. When she saw Grace, she grinned. "You're supposed to be famous now," she teased. Grace smiled. "I'm just here for coffee." The cafe looked different, not in a bad way, just fuller. Photos of veterans lined the walls, smiling faces, quiet moments, dogs curled under tables. Near the register was a new sign, "Grace's Corner, where no one sits alone." Grace sat for a few minutes, sipped her coffee, and said nothing. She didn't need to. Later that day, she drove across town to speak at a fundraiser for veteran families. It was a small event. Older folks, a few kids holding crayon posters that said "Thank you, heroes." She stood at the front with no notes in hand. "I didn't set out to build a program," she said. "I just refused to throw out a man and his dog." The room went quiet. Then the applause came, loud, long, honest. In the back, Ray stood watching. His silver star gleamed on his chest. He gave her a quiet salute. Back at the wellness center that night, Grace sat alone. She stood by the wall of photos, pictures of new beginnings, gentle recoveries. She added one more. It was a picture of the cafe taken the day after the Humvees arrived, people shoulder to shoulder, coffee cups raised, dogs lying peacefully under tables. No fear, no shame, just community. Above the photo, she taped a small card. It read, "Legacy isn't what we build for ourselves. It's what we protect in others." She stared at it for a while, and in that stillness, something clicked. The cafe hadn't closed. It had simply moved. 3 weeks after the fundraiser, a letter arrived. It was sealed with the gold emblem of the U.S. Department of Defense. Colonel Gaines handed it to Grace personally. They stood inside her office. The room was quiet, peaceful. Healing was happening all around. "You'll want to sit for this," he said. She opened it carefully. She read the first line, then read it again. "You are hereby nominated for the National Civilian Commendation for Distinguished Service to Veterans." She covered her mouth with her hand. "I didn't do anything special," she whispered. Colonel Gaines chuckled. "That's exactly why you're getting it." The letter also came with an invitation to Washington, D.C., not just to receive the award, but to speak at the National Veterans Advocacy Conference. Grace went quiet. "I'm not a public speaker." "You are now," he said with a wink. The day she left for D.C., she packed light. Just one blazer, Michael's old watch, and the same cafe notebook she'd used for years. Inside it were pages of scribbled names, birthdays, reminders like, "Tiffany prefers tea. Don't ask Ray about May 15th. That notebook held more weight than any speech. At the airport, someone called her name. "Need a ride, Miss Donnelly." She turned. It was Ray McMillan. He stood tall in full dress blues, Shadow at his side, calm and alert. "The base assigned me as your escort," he said, smiling. Grace laughed, half nervous, half amazed. "You clean up pretty well," Ray smirked. "You're the one about to speak at the Pentagon." The ballroom was bigger than she expected. White tablecloths, spotlights, a glowing screen behind the podium with her name in elegant letters. When she stepped up to speak, Her voice was soft, but the whole room leaned in. I'm not a general. I'm not a doctor. I didn't write policies, she began. I managed a cafe near a military base. She paused. I served coffee. I listened. Another pause. But in that space, I saw something sacred. Veterans came, not for answers, but for presence. They didn't want to be fixed. They wanted to be seen. Heads nodded, dots wiped. Away tears. One day, I got fired for letting a man sit with his service dog. That was the moment everything changed. But the truth is, it was never about coffee. It was about dignity. Thunderous applause filled the room. Ray stood in the back. He didn't clap. He just nodded, like a soldier hearing something that finally made sense. Later that night, Grace stepped outside alone. The sun was dipping behind the buildings. She needed fresh air and quiet. A man in a gray suit approached. White beard, thin glasses, kind eyes. You don't remember me, do you? He asked gently. She studied his face. He pulled out a photo. Old and worn. Michael was in it, sitting outside the cafe with a man in uniform. That was me. He said, you poured me coffee the day I got discharged. You didn't say a word. You just smiled. It was the first time I felt like myself again. He handed her the photo. It's yours now. She took it with shaking hands. No words came. Grace didn't go straight to the town celebration when she returned. She drove to the center first. The Veteran Transition and Wellness Center. It was late. Quiet. The fire pit outside was still glowing softly. A few veterans sat around it, talking. In low voices, she walked through the doors alone. Inside, the walls held the same energy as the cafe once had, calm, steady, welcoming. She walked to the photo wall. In her bag were the pictures. The first was a snapshot from the conference. A standing ovation. People clapping, tears in their eyes, her name glowing behind her. She taped it gently to the wall. Beside it, she placed the second photo, the old one, Michael, outside the cafe, smiling with the soldier she now knew. She wrote a simple line under them both. Honor grows where kindness is consistent. She stepped back, took a deep breath. The journey wasn't over, but something important had settled. Then the door opened. A young man walked in. His shoulders were tense, his eyes unsure. He looked around like he wasn't sure if he was in the right place. Is this for people like us? He asked quietly. Grace smiled. No, son, she said gently. This is for people like all of us. He gave a small nod and stepped further inside, and just like that, her circle wasn't just full. It was open. In a world that moves too fast, where people forget names and rush past small acts of courage, where kindness is sometimes mistaken for weakness, Grace Donnelly became a reminder. She didn't wear a uniform. She didn't salute. But she upheld something sacred. Dignity. And she did it every day, in small ways that changed lives. What happened at that cafe in Mason, Georgia, may seem rare, but maybe it shouldn't be. How many people like Grace have we walked past? How many veterans have we thanked with only words, but not actions? Her story asks us something simple. Would I have stood up like she did? Have I stayed silent when I should have spoken? At Taqnix, we believe in telling stories that matter, not just stories about heroes in uniform, but about the quiet ones who stand tall without ever raising their voices. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who believes in quiet courage. And if you've ever witnessed a moment of silent bravery or lived through one, tell us in the comments. Your voice might inspire the next act of grace. Thank you for spending your time with us.